not. Oh, here we go. Check. Check 1, 2. Lights on. Check. Check. Check.
Testing, testing.
Hey, okay, we're on. Hey, Mitch. Get sir. Okay, we're going to get started. We have a quorum. Good afternoon. We on the air? Okay, for those tuning into council audio, we welcome you to today's Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee meeting. Today's Monday, May 9th, and we welcome you, joined here by Mr. O'Farrell, Mr. Rue, and we hope to all the mothers out there you had a blessed and celebratory Mother's Day. We love you. With that, we'll take general public comment. Are there anyone here for general public comment? Okay, seeing none, we will close general public comment. Okay, so if I can direct your attention to the agenda. We have a card on 3. So, colleagues, we'll take on consent unless you want to pull any of these items and hold them on the desk. Items 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Without objection, we have Mr. Price joining us. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Okay, hearing no objections, we will approve those items on consent. So I have a card on 3. We will take that item first.
Item 3, motion O'Farrell Price directing the Bureau of Engineering in consultation with the Los Angeles Department of Transportation to waive the required highway dedication for the Entrepreneur Mixed-Use Residential Commercial Development Project located at 1657 through 1661 Northwestern Avenue.
Thank you. With that, if I can call up Doug Hines. Hines? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Haynes. You got it right the second time, so thank you very much. I'm here with objections based on the process, not on the project itself. The application for this has just gone in. We've had a lot of frustration. I'm with the Hollywood Studio District Neighborhood Council. I chair the planning committee. I'm also with the East Hollywood Neighborhood Council, and I chair that planning committee. Whereas instead of following the normal process where there would be public input, there would be radius notification, and there'd be an opportunity for the community to determine whether or not this is appropriate. Instead, prior to that, the waiver is being granted. I'll point out on Western Avenue, across the street, the dedication has been approved. Down the street, across the street, the project there, it's been approved. On the north end of Western, north of Hollywood Boulevard, you have the Marshalls and you have Ralph's. There's been the improvement on Ralph's. There's been the dedication for Marshalls. So as a community, we would like to discuss this before it's granted, and we want that opportunity from the City Council first before you approve this. We'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate your presence. Okay. Item 3 was held because of the card. We will moving forward and approve item 3 unless there's any objection. You're good? Okay. So hearing no objection, we'll move and approve item 3. Okay, next item number 10.
Item 10, City Engineer Report relative to the creation of an underground utility district along La Cienega Boulevard for a length of 300 feet, both north and south of a proposed pedestrian bridge south of Wright Crest Drive.
Okay, we have staff for this item here. BOE. Yeah, if you could just walk us through the steps required to create an underground wiring district. We're now joined by Ms. Martinez. Thank you for joining us. We have a packed and full Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee meeting. If you can just walk us through the process, sir, and identify yourself.
Yes, I'm Ben Moore. I'm with the Bureau of Engineering. Distinguished committee members and others, the undergrounding process is established by Ordinance 145-148, and that was adopted in 1973. The process, very basically, allows a group to establish an underground utility district requiring any current or future utilities to be placed underground instead of overhead. For this particular case, it would take the existing overhead lines and put them underground. Once it's identified, the council, by motion, would request generally the Department of Public Works as well as the Department of Water and Power to prepare a feasibility study analyzing the impacts to the community, costs and cost, technical, and so on, to be prepared. That's the report that you have in front of you right now.
And this district would encompass residential, park space, commercial?
This would encompass primarily park space.
Park space.
On both sides of the proposed pedestrian bridge is the Kenneth Hahn State Regional Park.
So what if a residential area would like to do something similar?
If there's a residential area or if there is power takeoffs from the overhead line going directly to customers, then those would also need to be transferred to an underground connection.
Got it. And that would, in turn, form an underground utility district in a residential area. Is that my understanding?
I'm sorry?
In a residential area, a district would be identified.
For what we have in front of us right now?
No, I know, not in front of us. I'm just saying in general.
In general, yes. An underground utility district may be identified for a residential, commercial, industrial, any type of area.
Okay. Thank you. Just had a couple questions, and just for my reference as well. I appreciate the presentation. Colleagues, any questions on item number 10? Mr. Rue or Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the same lines, I think this is a great project, and on the same lines as the chair was asking, can you explain a little bit about the funding mechanism, Rule 20A, and how that works? Because this is being fully funded through the county, right?
Yes, it's being fully funded by the county, and I'm not as familiar with the workings of Rule 20A and how they apply to this particular project, but we do have a representative from LA County who is able to join us here today, who may be able to answer those, may be able to speak to that more effectively.
Sure.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Feldhaus. I'm a project manager for the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Works.
Welcome.
This underground utility district project will be funded using Rule 20A. It's a tariff set aside by the Public Utilities Commission. In this case, it's Southern California Edison, who's the service provider in this area. They have provided a fund of money that comes from tariffs associated with their utility providers and customers in the area. The county is able to allocate those funds to provide these special public interest projects, in this case beautification of the neighborhood for undergrounding the utilities in this area.
So, as the chair was asking earlier, if some residential communities wanted to take advantage of this as well, could we use Rule 20A as well?
Right. That's
Yes, it's a state Public Utilities Commission tariff that is available to multiple public agencies, not just Southern California Edison.
Okay.
So DWP has access to these dollars?
I'm not familiar with DWP, but I would assume so.
Well, we'll be in touch.
Yes. Mr. Price?
I had a similar question because I know that there was a undergrounding project on Central Avenue, and there was a issue about a cost to the business owners. And I know we were trying to figure out a way to cover some of those expenses. is that usually the case, or is this fund normally available in undergrounding situations to cover the costs associated with businesses?
These are costs that are out-of-pocket expenses for the utility company. In this case, Southern California Edison will use the funds to provide design, engineering, and construction to relocate the underground utility fees. I'm not certain how the tariff funds can be used to offset certain businesses in the local area.
All right. Thank you. We'll find out.
Right. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, with that, without objection, we will approve this item, but adopt the findings with the following recommendations. Adopt the findings contained in the BOE report, and secondly, direct the city clerk to initiate the notification process of a public hearing for affected parties pursuant to ordinance number 145148. And that'll be the order on this item. Okay, moving forward, item number 11.
Item 11, Board of Public Works report relative to establishing a tree replacement and planting in lieu fee.
Okay, we have Fernando here, Public Works. For a presentation on item number 11 before us. And I also have one card on this item.
Good afternoon, Chairman, committee members, Ron Lorenzo, Bureau of Street Services. The Board of Public Works, the Bureau of Street Services, and the Department of City Planning have been meeting diligently over the last 6 months to a year regarding a problem that we have had getting trees in the ground relevant to private developments, mainly large private developments, as well as many of those tree replacements that are required due to the removal of street trees. After many, many meetings and lots of heated debate about these issues, we think we've come up with a good plan, and Fernando will be bringing that plan to you in his presentation. In essence, what we are going to be doing is accepting a payment in lieu of some of the replacement trees for both those trees required as part of private development, as well as those trees this board, when they meet, permits for street tree removals and the replacement thereof. So with that, I will allow Fernando to give the presentation.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to recognize Public Works Commissioner Heather Repenning. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us during this for this item. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Fernando Campos, Executive Officer with the Board of Public Works. As Ron indicated, this has definitely been something that the Board of Public Works, along with a series of other departments across the entire city, have been working collaboratively to get us to this point. The item before you is to, in essence, adopt the concept of a tree replacement in lieu fee concept that would allow us to plant as many trees as possible in the ground and also expand our urban forests across the entire city. So the issues of trees has not been anything new for the Department of Public Works. In fact, it's part of our DNA. This dates back to the early 1940s. We have a series of policies that the Board of Public Works has adopted since then that are attached to your report in regards to tree and tree matters, such as tree maintenance and also planning. The City Council designated our Bureau of Street Services to be the manager to oversee all city tree matters, but the Board of Public Works also designated the Chief Forester to be the lead person who can process, review, and issue tree permits. All tree-related matters are governed by the Los Angeles Municipal Code 46 and Section 46 and Section 62, along with our policy that has been adopted by the city, the Board of Public Works. So why are we here in front of you today, in front of your council, regarding this concept? One, we really want to get your feedback and opinions and thoughts in regards to what this concept could look like. This is a proposal. This is a concept at this stage, so we understand that it could morph into something different, but we really would like to gain your support and also move this on to City Council for full adoption. The problem that we're trying to resolve is really that we want to have as many trees go in the ground. So we do have some trees that go unplanted, that are not adopted and eventually die. The reason why is that we do currently in our policy with the Board of Public Works adopted that we have a 2-to-1 tree replacement policy. So for every tree that we remove from the ground, we have to replace it with 2 trees. However, there is an exception to the rule in the policy, and that is in the event that we cannot place the trees back on site, the Board of Public Works may, at its discretion, authorize the permit and allow a certain number of trees to be sent to our city nursery or local nursery in lieu of actually being planted in the ground. So that actually satisfies the city's policy. However, it does not satisfy and it does not achieve our main goal, which is putting all the trees back in the ground. So when we move these trees into our city nursery, some trees do get adopted, some trees are utilized by our Bureau of Street Services to go back into the ground. However, a vast majority of these trees end up not surviving the adoption period or surviving the in-the-ground period. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out a way that we can make sure that these trees do not die in our nursery or go unplanted or go unadopted. So historically, when we look at the Board of Public Works' decision-making over the last 9 months or so, we noticed that 1 in every 2 permits that were approved and considered by the board had that tree nursery element in there. So when we look at how many trees that were supposed to go on the ground, about 628 were intended to go on the ground, 306 were removed. However, 202 of those trees were actually sent to the nursery. So this was an alarming rate for us. And we wanted to look at a way, how do we fix this problem? How do we provide an option to our developers? How do we provide an option to our permittee or applicants to figure out a way to plant these trees back in the ground? Next slide, please. Now, the Board of Public Works approves applications for trees that have 3 or more trees being removed. In the board policy, it indicates that the chief forester can approve what we call onesies and twosies. This is named by Mr. Ron Lorenzi, that's in the audience. These onesies and twosies are basically 1 tree removals or 2 tree removals. Those tree applications do not have to come in front of the Board of Public Works for approval. Those are approved by the chief forester at the Bureau of Street Services level. When we looked at what those tree permits have been when we look at those tree approval permits for onesies and twosies, we found that the same trend was happening at the board level as it was at the Bureau of Street Services level. In fact, it was just slightly higher, where about 40% of those trees were not going in the ground. They were actually nursery bound. And so that's where the big issue is, and that's what we're trying to fix with this concept. So the concept, really, it's about reducing the number of trees that are not planted. We're also looking at ways to expand the urban tree canopy. But most importantly, this option really just provides an option. This concept really does provide an option to our developers so that if they cannot plant the trees on site, instead of sending those trees to the nursery, we really want to have a catalyst or a vehicle so that we can plant those trees. And this is where the birth of the tree replacement in lieu concept comes from. And that is to provide an option to the developers, provide an option to the permittee or the applicant, instead of sending those trees to the nurseries, putting them in the ground. Next slide, please. So as we consider, as your committee considers this concept, there's really 2 things that you need to look at in terms of the concept. Who will it impact? So we have an impact to our development community, and then we also have an impact to our private residents. When a developer pulls a permit or asks for a permit to remove these trees, they have to apply for a B permit. When a private residents request a permit for removal of a tree on public right-of-way, they have to request an A permit or sometimes a tree removal permit. When you look at those 2 different issues, the Department of Planning and also the Board of Public Works deals with the development side, and then also on the private residential side, it's the Board of Public Works or the Department of Public Works that looks at that side. The main thing is that it provides an option, and that's one thing that I want to reiterate and make sure that it's very clear. The concept is not mandatory. It's only an option for a developer to say, instead of sending my tree to the nursery, which is subject to approval by the Board of Public Works, if it's not sent to the nursery, we can still move forward with the project, but we would allow the developer to select the tree replacement in lieu concepts where they can make a deposit. Next slide, please. where they can make a deposit in the amount of $2,514 for private developers. This would pay the cost to plant a 24-inch box tree. It would also pay for the cost of planting. It would also pay for 3 years of watering, any stakes and guards that are required to maintain and establish that tree. In addition to that, it also pays some administrative overcosts. So this administration overcost would help us not only manage the project, but also make sure that we are tracking all the expenditures, and then that we're also treating the finances appropriately in accordance to GAAP rules and the Controller's Office. The concept also proposes, instead of charging a $2,500 fee that we would for a developer, we would do a sliding scale for private residents for residential projects. So those residential projects, instead of charging the $2,500 that we're proposing in front of you today, we would only propose to charge $245. The reason being, or the logic behind the $245, is that instead of discouraging private applicants or private residents to apply for the tree removal, we really want to encourage them to move forward with establishing the trees. But we do know that $2,500 may be too cost prohibitive for a private resident to come in and pay $2,500 per tree. The Los Angeles Municipal Code does currently require the City of Los Angeles to maintain those trees for up to 5 years. However, right, so for the developers, it's the 5 years. For the private residential side, it's 3 years. Did I get that correct, Ron? 3 years. So under the municipal code, the City of LA is now responsible for that watering. So we felt as a group that the proposal and the concept before you should also indicate that in the private residential side. So instead of charging $2,500, we would recommend that the private resident be allowed to deposit $245 to cover a portion of the cost. And this portion of the cost would basically take care of the procurement of the tree and the planting of the tree with some administration oversight.
A question on the 15-gallon size of the tree. Who decided on that amount?
So the 15-gallon difference versus the 24-inch. So
Right.
our current policy requires a 24-inch type box for tree developers. For the private residents, since we don't know exactly where the site will be or the public right-of-way site would be,
Okay.
ideally if it was in front of the home, 24-inch box, but since we don't know, the recommendation is to do a 15-gallon, and then our chief forester, along with our
Would
third-party
assess it.
administrator, will decide in collaboration with your council
Understood.
offices, of course.
Thank you.
So how do we operationalize this concept? How do we move it from the abstract world into something we can actually do administratively? The vision that we have is that it would be a 6-step process. The first step would be that the developer or the private resident elects. Again, it's optional, it's not mandatory. They would have to voluntarily elect to go into the tree replacement in lieu concept process. Then from there, the planning department or the Board of Public Works or even our chief forester, if it's a onesie and twosie type of application, they would consider the application and approve the permit if appropriate. And then the applicant would pay the in lieu fee. After the applicant pays the in lieu fee, we would collect it, we would deposit it into the Public Works Trust Fund. Once it hits our Public Works Trust Fund, the Board of Public Works would procure a third-party administrator to help us maintain the funds and also procure the funds and oversee the project so that we know exactly where every tree is being planted, having a catalog of the trees, and more importantly, having an exact cost for each tree. And last but not least, once we establish the third-party administrator, the administrator will help us maintain and establish the trees for a 3-year period. In terms of success and how do we know where promised land is or how do we measure our success, our goal is really to provide an option to developers and private residents. It's also an option for the planning department to provide a permit alternative compliance to meet the city's zoning code. Let me explain a little into detail what that means. So currently, if a developer submits a request or a design to our planning department, if there is enough space on site for the developer to plant the trees back on site, they would do so. However, because of lot size or sometimes space constraints, those trees cannot be planted back on site. So therefore, the developer has a couple of options. One, they can go back to the drawing board and redesign if it's an option, or two, they can go back to the Planning Commission and ask for a hardship waiver. That hardship waiver does require a lengthy process, sometimes 6 months, sometimes even more than 1 year. The proposal in front of you would allow the developer a third option, which would allow them to do a variance from the zoning code requirements where the executive director or the planning department would make a decision whether this would be allowed or not allowed for the developer. Again, it's just an option. It's not mandatory. It's an option for the developer. In terms of metrics, how will we measure our success? One of our main goals is to reduce the number of nursery-bound trees, also increase the number of trees that go planted in the ground, and of course expanding our city urban canopy. The proposal in front of you is intended to be a full cost recovery, and we believe that on the development side it is doing that. However, on the private residential side, there is some cost that is being absorbed by the City of Los Angeles as required currently by the municipal code. The next slide here just gives you a scenario of what we think is going to happen with this proposal if your committee opts to approve this and move forward to City Council for full adoption. For a scenario of about 300 trees, we anticipate that the program would cost us about $750,000. Based on the proposed in lieu fee, we would be able to recuperate about $600,000, leaving about $136,000 being absorbed by the city at this point. Our recommendations are very clear in terms of next steps. Again, this is starting the dialogue and moving the concept forward to the next step, and that is to adopt the tree in lieu concept, approving to establish the tree replacement in lieu fee, requesting the city attorneys to prepare, draft, and present an ordinance that would add a new section to the LAMC, Section 62, instruct our Bureau of Streets, instruct the Bureau of Street Services along with the Board of Public Works to review the cost annually so that we can make sure that if these fees are not sufficient, that we can adjust them, or vice versa. If the fees are too much, then we can come back in a year from now and we can adjust those fees accordingly. Last but not least, authorize the collection and deposit of the fees, authorize us to establish a revenue appropriation account so that we can hold the monies into our Public Works Trust Fund, and then authorize the Board of Public Works to make any administrative and technical changes that's necessary so that we can move the concept forward.
Thank you,
With
Fernando.
that, I will leave it up. I will take any questions that you may have. The planning department is here as well.
Yes, a
and
lot
then
of
we also have our
coordination.
Chief
Thank you so
Forester
much with the planning department. Appreciate the presentation.
and members of the
Commissioner,
mayor's office
wanna
as
say
well,
anything?
and our commissioner as well.
Help me welcome Commissioner Repenning, the Board of Public Works. You help lead this effort. Thank you so much for your help.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for hearing this proposal today. This really comes out of, at the board, we have to vote on tree removal permits. And so they come to us and we see pictures of, they're not always healthy trees, but sometimes they're healthy, beautiful trees that we have to vote to actually give people the authority to remove. And so, it's all in the course of a city, fixing sidewalks, adding new housing units. Some trees have to come down. But for me and my fellow commissioners, the thing has always been, how do we get to our 2-to-1 replacement policy? So we're going to lose a mature tree, but if we're planting it back 2-to-1, then that is acceptable. And so what's been happening, as you've heard, is that a lot of times our, sending a tree to the nursery policy is not actually resulting in a 2-to-1 replacement. And so this was one of the things that we looked at in coordination with one of our planning commissioners, Renee Dake-Wilson, who's been working with a lot of the developers, especially in the downtown area, who were looking for a solution rather than having to go to a variance when they cannot achieve the on-site planning ratios. They were looking for an option, and so I think the development community is actually pretty excited about this because they would rather have the certainty of just writing a check as opposed to going through the variance process. So, I think this is a way to help us get closer to 2-to-1. I think canopy is a very key element of our city's infrastructure, and so I appreciate you taking this up today. Thank you.
You reminded me, Commissioner, to recognize Planning Commissioner Wilson for sparking this dialogue and moving the ball forward on creating a policy that's going to work for everyone involved here. So I appreciate it. I know, Ms. Martinez, you had a question?
Yes, I'm not sure who can answer this, but I have a quick question. So in my district, we're undergoing a pretty big effort to try to repair some of our sidewalks. Would this help expedite the tree removal permit that the local contractor needs to pull in order to get rid of the unhealthy tree or the tree that's causing the sidewalk to be broken. Apparently, that process is taking too long, and so I just want to make sure we can expedite that because it's actually slowing down our process to try to repair sidewalks in my district.
Again, Ron Lorenzen, Bureau of Street Services. For the most part on residential properties, which would be a lot of your district, residential properties with what we call the onesies and twosies, the 1 and 2 tree removal permit requests, we have expedited that to where we're expecting in the sidewalk program, when it's determined a tree has to be removed, that we will probably be able to have those permits out within 10 working days or less, probably less. That's what we're looking forward to as we move forward with the sidewalk repair program. But I just want to be really clear. We're talking about once we determine that the tree actually does require
I understand that. So is this the sidewalk repair program for the entire city? Because I'm not part of that. What I'm talking about is an allocation that I made to begin sidewalk repair in my district alone. So are you telling me that the expedited process is only going to take about 10 days?
Any sidewalk permit request.
Is that the case now?
We have not pulled all the triggers yet to make that happen, but it's getting less and less and less as we speak.
So how far away are we from getting it down to 10
I would say by the
days?
time we get to the end of the fiscal year that all tree removal permits, once we've determined that a tree has to be removed, 1s and 2s, that the chief forester, the head of the urban forestry division can sign off, we can do within 10 days.
Okay, so by the end of June of this year,
10 working days.
we're going to be down to 10 working days. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all involved for your leadership to make this really creative new policy for increasing the number of trees in our urban canopy. A couple of questions. Is it accurate that the protected tree, city protected tree species replacement, is that a 4-to-1 as opposed to just a 2-to-1? And how does this program, this in lieu program, affect our protected trees?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. As you've indicated, the board's policy for tree removal replacement for protected trees is 4-to-1. This policy will not impact the protected tree removal permits in any way. Well, it's not just 4 trees. It's 4 trees minimum. With the policy for protected trees is actually to replace the value of the trees that are lost. So oftentimes it's more than that. So and those are also private property trees. Those are not trees, street trees permitted by the Board of Public Works. Those are private property trees. And the code is actually completely different for those trees.
But there are some old coastal oaks in the public right-of-way, and I think it's rare that you get a permit to remove them, but it is going to happen sometimes in a one-off situation.
The Section 46 of the LA Municipal Code, which is what protects the protected tree species, actually there's exceptions for trees planted as part of a tree planting program. Street trees are all planted as part of a tree planting program because they're required. There's something that developers are required to do. It's a program. Street trees are protected by Section 62. Protected trees on private property are protected by LAMC Section 46. They're completely separate because trees in the public right-of-way are part of a program and are exempt from Section 46.
Okay, so if a protected tree species is in a public right-of-way and needs to be removed, would it be replaced commensurate with the ordinance?
It's with 2-to-1.
2-to-1 instead of 4-to-1.
That is correct. It's considered a street tree because it's exempt from the protected tree ordinance.
Okay. Maybe that should be looked at. Just saying. And what's the incentive for developers to opt into this in lieu arrangement as opposed to just purchasing a tree and storing it? Is it the whole cost of a variance piece? Is that why it's an incentive?
Actually, I think the planning department can maybe address that a little bit, but I will actually say that I believe that for a lot of developers that being able to pay a fee for many things that they don't have to then actually obtain the tree, pay a contractor to obtain the material is actually easier. And then that in itself is an incentive, but if planning has anything else to say.
Okay.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Nick Marisich with the City Planning Department. We really see this as a valuable tool. The zoning code currently requires residential projects to provide a certain number of trees on site, and those can be met in the adjacent right-of-way. But oftentimes on projects where they're building out across their entire lot, there's not sufficient lot area for very dense projects to plant the number of trees, and so we think that this will provide an option through an existing provision in the zoning code to really streamline the process for those projects that could benefit from this.
Thank you. I'm just thinking if I was a developer and it was a lot cheaper for me to just purchase a 24-inch box tree and donate it to the city, maybe that's $250 instead of $2,500, or maybe it's $1,000, I don't know. But the incentive, in terms of just the bottom line incentive.
Nick Marisic again. I think that the fee amount still has to be studied through a fee study to confirm that it's actually covering the cost. So I think that the goal is that, and others could probably speak better to this point, but I think that the fee is not intended to necessarily be a cheaper one than the actual cost.
I think I understand your question a little bit better. A developer, when they're required to plant trees on their private property, they can't do so. What we're now actually trying to do, if they don't go to the City Planning Commission and get a modification or some change to their conditions, then the city is having to try to work with the developer to find locations that the trees can be planted, and they're still responsible for maintaining them. So they really don't save any money. What this allows them to do is have perhaps a more expedited avenue that puts it a little bit on the city, where the city is going to be given the money. The Urban Forestry Division will find locations, and then the third party that's going to be doing the material obtainance as well as the watering for the 3 years will then take over that part of it. So once the developer pays the check, it's really costing them the same amount of money. It's just expediting the process so that they don't have to do some of the steps themselves.
And they're just off the hook after that. So the incentive is they don't have to pay for the long-term maintenance of the tree to keep it alive. They can just write the check and never look back.
No, they are paying for long-term maintenance. They're paying for 3 years maintenance in their check.
That's what I mean, though. We're talking about the same thing. So they pay $2,500 and they're done.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. That's the incentive. It's less hassle.
That is correct. Exactly.
They don't have to worry about managing for 3 years.
Exactly.
The care and maintenance.
That's exactly correct. Correct.
Thank you.
That is correct. Fernando Campos again. Just one thing to add also, in addition to the savings of time and moving through the process a lot faster, one thing that we really want to keep in mind is we want trees in the ground. So allowing the developers to send these trees to the nursery, 80-90% of the time, or even higher than that, these trees do not make it to the ground. That's the solution. That's the problem we're trying to fix.
I get that.
So from the developer standpoint, yes, it may be a little less costly because they're not adding administrative costs or accounting fees because they're absorbing that in-house. But our main goal for us is really trying to get those trees planted. And so there is a cost with that, and that's the proposed amount that that's being reflected in the concept.
Right, that's good. I'm just probing to make sure that the incentive is going to actually result in trees in the ground and more attractive than not. Lastly, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
The report projects a cost of $136,000 in the general fund for private residences. What can be done to make this entire process or this entire option fee neutral or general revenue neutral?
Okay.
Budget neutral.
All right, I'll answer it. In essence, the only way it could be fee neutral if we were charged residential
more money
obtainers the same amount of money. We've already determined what we think. There has to be a fee study. But we've already determined what we think it's going to cost, which is the just over $2,400 fee, or rather deposit. But what we've also tried to do, in light of the fact that property owners often have problems obtaining permits when they want to do the repair of sidewalks, for instance, on their own, we're trying to encourage our constituency to do those repairs. And one of the big challenges we had was to come up with a plan that actually didn't discourage private property owners from performing repairs at their own cost. And that is, to answer your question, the only way to do it would be to, as you can see, increase the deposit to the same amount as it would be for a developer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any others?
Yeah.
Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Few questions. So when you're considering a permit for tree removal, how much input is taken from the affected residents to determine whether removal, replanting, or payment of an in lieu fee would be preferable?
Are you talking about residential,
Yeah,
council member?
yes, residential
Okay.
primarily, but
Well, first of all, let's talk about the tree first. The city determines whether a tree can stay or go. That's not up to the requester for the permit. It will be an option for the residents, as they can still obtain 2 trees for every 1 tree that they're permitted, and the city will then, as Fernando has indicated, the board can waive that requirement and we take the tree in the nursery. We will still be offering that option. But for them especially, since for them it's almost cost neutral. If they pay the fee, or the deposit rather, they simply don't have to go to a landscape company and obtain the tree, have that landscape company deliver the tree to our nursery. So it will save them actually a lot of process that they would normally have to incur upon themselves.
Well, in the case of the developer, if the surrounding community wants trees instead of in lieu, do they have any option to try to put in their input for more trees being planted in the neighborhood?
Well, this will in fact do the same thing. If they choose the in lieu fee, and there are locations, we'll typically start looking around the development itself. The Urban Forestry Division will obtain locations where trees can be planted, and once we have the money, we can immediately then have the third party, once that third party is determined, that will be planting and watering the trees, obtain the trees and install them. So to answer your question, this mechanism will do exactly what you are suggesting.
So that's my next question. So is there any kind of mechanism that says, where you plant the trees? Is it some sort of, does it have to be in a distance vicinity, or?
Well, that's a good question. Are you going to talk about the Nexus Study? Well, Mr. Campos is going to talk about that's a financial nexus. We are doing a Nexus Study about how we can use money that's obtained by the proposal here, which still has to be performed. But we are confident that if this was approved, let's say council approved this tomorrow, and we were able to move forward and all of the applicable codes were created, even if we didn't have the Nexus Study, we know, I'm going to use the word know in quotes, that we could plant immediately adjacent to a development because that nexus is already apparent. What the study will determine is, as we move out, if there aren't places to plant that we can move out, how far out we could get, what type of a vehicle do we use to determine that nexus. But the Urban Forestry Division right now, its policy in general is to find locations close to the permittee and then move out from there.
So you guys are going to do a study on that, I guess.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Fernando Campos again. The Nexus Study is really there and being proposed. It's currently now being deliberated by the Budget and Finance Committee in terms of funding this project. And so the Nexus Study that we are proposing to conduct next year is really about establishing reasonable relationship, not only financially, but also geographic locations of where these trees may be able to be planted. So the Nexus Study is really going to allow us to do 2 things. One, to establish the reasonable relationship between the current deposits that we have in the Public Works Trust Fund compared to what we can fund in other public works projects. And then 2, use that same parameter, if you will, whether it be geographics, whether it be 1 block, 2 block, 1 mile, 2 mile, or even a council district boundary, use that as the reasonable relationship to establish a policy that would come before the Board of Public Works and ultimately your committee and then City Council to adopt that policy. So in essence, if that policy was in place tomorrow, yes, we can move forward with that. The other thing that I want to point out, Councilman, is that under the Department of under the Department of Planning, they have a downtown design guide, which basically allows trees to be planted off-site, not necessarily on-site, but there is a parameter in terms of where those trees should be placed, and it has to be in order of nearby streets, public parks, and then private projects. So what the planning department needs our help on is to establish that reasonable relationship, and that's where the Nexus Study comes in. So it's not only going to help us with the Public Works Trust Fund, but it'll also help us with establishing a reasonable relationship distance, if you will, for this concept as well.
So the Nexus Study will come to our committee?
That is correct.
Okay, that's great. Looking forward to that. Quickly, if they don't do the in lieu fee in the current structure, the ordinance says that they have to replace 2 to 1 with 24-inch box trees. That's currently?
Go ahead. That is correct.
Okay. And you know, the concept fee, I think the incentive for developers would be that this is hassle-free, basically, right? I mean, even if it's cost neutral for them, hassle-free is like a huge load off their mind. But looking at this fee, I mean, is this enough 2,500? Because when Councilman O'Farrell asked about the protected tree, you guys also consider the actual value of the tree. So do we not want to put in the value of the tree that's being cut down? Or I'm just worried about this might not cover.
This is a big question. Let me think about this for a second. It would actually take a long time to actually get into all of the details of this question. The protected tree ordinance, if I may address that first, is directed towards protecting a natural resource that's native to the region, which is slightly different from, and that's why the laws are written somewhat differently, to an infrastructure element like street trees are. Street trees are part of our multi-layered infrastructure system. So the private property trees don't really exist in the same global arena that street trees do. Street trees are in conflict and have to live with many other elements of infrastructure, so it's slightly different. So the board historically has determined to have a replacement based upon a number rather than some set value. And this is the number that you have alluded to, the two 24-inch box trees. Not to say that the other way doesn't have merit, it may. And we've looked at it many times, and to be honest with you, no matter how we looked at it, we've looked at a lot of other cities too, we still end up basically coming back to something that's fairly close to two 24-inch box trees to start with. That's not to say that there aren't other ways to do it. But we are confident that if we do this and the trees get in the ground, that, and I've said this many times in open council as well, that the sustainability of the street tree population will be increased. Because we need young trees. We need older trees that are preserved. We need middle-aged trees that stay there as well. But we need an influx of newly planted trees, not all at once, but bit by bit, so that sometime in the future, and with the sidewalk program particularly, that at the end of a 15 to 30-year program, that we can have a population of street trees that's sustainable.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm asking this question because it's twofold. One, I want to make sure you guys are fully funded. So, about charging more. But the second thing is the optics and the perception. Because even right now, when we cut down a tree and do a 2-to-1 replacement, you know, I'm sure you know it more than I do. Some neighborhoods are upset because they don't like the 24-inch tree or the 15-gallon. They're saying it's too small because they see a more bigger, majestic tree that's been cut, and they want an equal replacement type. So if we now go ahead and say you could cut down a tree for $2,500 fee, you know, it just might not, because it's not the tree, it's not the number that certain communities are worried about. It's about the actual size of the tree, the canopy, you know, the whole.
I understand. And without getting into too much depth, I'm going to tell you real quick a little bit of arboriculture knowledge. It's been determined through many, many studies that the smaller tree you place in a new planting area, the faster it acclimates to that planting area. Typically, a 15-gallon plant, which is a tree about 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter, will catch the 24-inch box tree planted at the same time within 3 years. A 24-inch box tree will catch a 36-inch box tree, which is almost twice as large, in 5 years. So what I'm saying to you is the longer trees stay in containers and the bigger they get, the slower they are to acclimate to where you plant them. Just like a seed would have the best chance. Okay. So that we at Urban Forestry many, many years ago made the determination that a 24-inch box tree is probably the best.
No, I mean the science, I don't disagree with the science. I'm just saying the optics, the perception of it.
I understand. And well, with that's this body's, the council bodies, and my challenge here to let everybody know in the city as we move forward, and we know we're going to be moving forward with this, to let them understand what does it look like to be sustainable.
So just fee-wise, I mean, I would be open to you guys actually seeing if you could make it more robust for yourselves.
Yeah, Councilmember Fernando Campos again. The proposal before you, the concept, does include an element of a fee study, having that fees analyzed every year and then updating those fees to determine exactly your question, is $2,500 enough? It could be that it's too much or it could be too little. However, based on our current knowledge, working with the Million Tree Initiative, also working with the Bureau of Street Services and a series of nonprofit organizations, the cost, and also including the Bureau of Street Services, State of the Street Tree Report. It's about $2,400 there. So the amount here, everything keeps coming back to a range of $2,300, $2,400, $2,500. So we believe that the amount before you is very, 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 very close to that. However, just to make sure that we are collecting the right amount and making sure that this concept is fully cost neutral, we are recommending to do a fee study every year so that we can come back to the City Council to adjust those fees.
Sure.
And that fee may not be adjusted. We may be able to validate it every year, or if the fee needs to go up, we would propose that fee increase, or if it needs to be decreased, we will definitely make sure that we propose that. Our city planning department would also like to add it.
Yeah, hi, Nick Marisic again from City Planning. I just wanted to add a point of clarification with respect to the incentive as it's being discussed for developers to pay the fee. So currently, if all the trees cannot be planted on site or in their adjacent right-of-way, many developers are actually going through the variance process, which is a lengthy process through the zoning administrator, has hardship-related findings, and so this would give us an alternative way of granting those sorts of requests to deviate, and we would actually see the planting of the trees as opposed to the waiver, essentially, of the requirement.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rue. Mr. Price?
Well, it seems like it's a win-win, I think, for the city and for the developers. A couple of quick questions, though. Did you say that 40% of the trees in the nursery are die because they're not used in time, or did I mishear that? What was that 40%? Or what is the percentage of trees that aren't used, or they go bad, or that?
Right, so the 40% that you were referring to is when we look at onesies and twosies, i.e. Tree permit removals for a removal of one tree or two trees, 40% of those trees have a nursery bound requirement or condition.
Okay.
So instead of having those trees back in the ground, 40% of those trees do not actually make it to the ground. They make it to the nursery.
And once in the
they
nursery,
make it to the
what happens to
nursery,
them?
then that's where the problem is. Most of those trees end up not getting adopted, end up not being planted, or eventually die because of the type of species, or they become root bound, or the size of the tree is not enough, where it's not the right size that we need for the public right of way or whatever project we're working on. So therefore, those trees go unplanted and eventually die.
And do we have a plan for, I don't want to say disposing of them, but parceling them out? Or, I mean, we just let them die? Do we give them to some other nonprofit agency, or do they're just used for mulch? Or what happens? I mean, it sounds like it's
So I'll let Ron.
an inventory of green good that we're just letting go to waste. Or am I just missing
Councilman,
something?
we've never done an inventory to actually have a specific number. I think the word most is a little misleading. I don't believe that's the truth of the matter. Oftentimes, these trees get used in a city project. That's where these trees would eventually end up in a new median, new grade separation, or someplace where the city is doing a project that we would use those. I think probably what happens more than anything is not so much dying, but they may sit in the nursery for a very, very, very long time, which means they have to be watered, they have to be maintained. So we're using resources to keep something alive that we may or may not be able to use in the future. But it's not our experience to go to the nursery and see a lot of dead trees.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Where is the nursery, if I may ask?
The nursery is on Cahuenga, right off the freeway, right north of the Hollywood Bowl.
There's only one?
It's the only place that the Bureau of Street Services stores trees, yes.
And who are the third parties that you use for maintenance? Is that a contract that goes out periodically for?
Correct.
Or
We're not sure who that would be.
nonprofits do that, yeah.
LACC, nonprofit?
It could be. It could be a nonprofit, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Now, Mr. Farrell brought a good point offline here on the use of protected trees. Where do the protected trees fall into this policy?
The protected trees do not fall under this policy. The protected trees, as I indicated, are protected by a different part of the Los Angeles Municipal Code, Section 46, and the verbiage, the wording, the reason for protection is completely different than the street tree population.
Wouldn't it be smart to be more, to have some consistency on the protected trees and the non-protected trees?
I will be happy to put, this is my opinion, this is just simply
Sure.
an opinion, that for protected trees, that the Bureau's goal is to much more, it's easier to make sure we get all those trees back in the ground. Because we're talking about private developments that we tell them what to do. So it's a little bit different than the public right-of-way where we're more restricted on space.
Right.
With private development, typically, we will tell them what to do. And we also look for other places that we can plant trees if we have to. But our goal on a project is to plant the replacement protected trees on property.
Understood. Okay, good.
If
So,
I may.
Mr. O'Farrell, go ahead. Mitch.
And no one's in dispute of that, but my whole point was if a protected tree happens to be on a public right-of-way and it is considered a street tree, for a developer to get the permit to remove that tree, shouldn't they also be required to replace that 4-to-1 instead of 2-to-1? And I think it'll be a rare occasion, but it will happen. So I don't see why we couldn't just be consistent with the protected tree ordinance in relation to this new policy.
Well, again, as you indicated, maybe we want to change the code because the code is very specific about the protected trees. The protected trees exempt trees.
I get all that, Ron, but why would you only require a developer to replace a protected tree species 2-to-1 if the ordinance is 4-to-1 in relation to this new policy? So the in lieu could be the same system. Instead of 2-to-1, it would be 4-to-1 if the tree is under the protected tree species ordinance, right?
I agree. We could go back and look at that. Yes.
To Mr. Rue's point, if there's an amazing old live coastal oak in front of on the parkway that the neighborhood loves and it gets permitted to be removed because of a project is going in there, wouldn't it make sense to just have the same requirement no matter where the tree is, parkway, private property, wherever?
All right, it's a fair argument.
I don't disagree at all. And in fact, trees to which you allude, if you have a Quercus lobata or a Quercus agrifolia, which is the coast and the valley oaks, which are the predominant trees here, those trees historically have not been removed. Now, when I say that, I mean naturally occurring. A large 120-year-old valley oak wasn't planted. It is a naturally occurring tree, which is where the laws differ. That's why there's the planting program exception. So we could certainly look at this. I don't disagree at all, and we'd be happy to look at that.
Thank you. We have one card on this item. Is it Ms. Ramsey from CCA?
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Rumsey, and I'm here on behalf of the Central City Association. We are supportive of the Board of Public Works report regarding tree replacement and establishing an in lieu fee. About 18 months ago, CCA, in partnership with other organizations, drafted a white paper regarding trees. A copy of the paper has been provided for you, and I hope you'll take a look at it as this policy evolves. We know there needs to be more flexibility built into the process to fulfill tree requirements for private developments, and this report is a good step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Any other questions, comments, colleagues? Okay, seeing none. We will then, without objection, approve this item and approve the Board of Public Works report and move that off to council. Okay, a couple more items left here. Item number 12.
Item 12, motion Cedillo Fuentes relative to granting an exception waiver to the city's one-year street cut moratorium to permit the installation of a water and sewage system in conjunction with the construction of the 53-unit affordable housing complex located at 1907 West 6th Street.
Thank you. So this item has to do with seeking an exception waiver to the city's one-year street cut moratorium, which I struggle approving. I understand this is much needed for CD1. You know, cutting into newly resurfaced street weakens the structural integrity of the street and shortens its lifespan. And because of this, the city's imposed a moratorium on street cuts for a one-year period following resurfacing, and there needs to be an ongoing, there seems to be an ongoing lack of coordination of the development that occurs on private property and the need to connect the utilities and the public right away. I think we need to do a better job of coordinating our efforts. Do we have street services here? If you can share with us notification of the adjacent property owners, and if that's been done, and how does the street services coordinate with planning and building and safety to ensure new buildings are able to connect the utilities under the street?
Good afternoon. Keith Mosey, Bureau of Street Services. Last year in April 2015, we sent out notifications to all registered property owners, and we have a coordinating staff strictly dedicated to doing this process. We sent out over 200 notifications to utility companies. We also work with the Department of Water and Power, Bureau of Engineering, other departments to basically broadcast every project that we propose to do in a street resurfacing program. The property owner of record at the time was a California partnership at 8520 in Culver City, which basically when staff, we create the project, we go to Navigate LA, we go through the county assessor's map, and we generate a list of all the property owners for a given project. Since then, we've noticed that there is a new property owner, so it appears that the ownership has changed hands since. This is not an unusual occurrence in that the new property owner may not have received notification from the previous property owner. Typically,
so you would say that would be the root cause of the issue here, the change of ownership?
Yes, for this particular instance, yes.
Okay, do we have anyone from the DWP here? Please come forward. I just wanted to ask, it clearly states in the motion that the DWP will be making connections to water and sewer systems, and when did the department become aware of the need to make these connections?
So we were notified by the developer, I believe it was in December. Developer came, made payment to our new business unit, and then it was in January, so we were getting ready to submit the permit, that we realized that there was a street moratorium on it, and that's when the whole process got started.
Okay. Building and safety and planning here? No? I just wanted to ask if, what type of coordination exists between the departments and street services. So maybe, Keith, if you can share with us, when a permit is pulled, when do you get notified by building and safety and the planning departments?
Well, just to clarify, we send out notifications to several city departments, and we actually try to expand our list to anybody that's willing. We've been meeting with Bureau of Engineering to solidify this process and this particular coordination. So when a developer or somebody goes to the permit counter desk, they would typically contact us if there is a conflict or something like that of a particular project, sometimes before, during, and after. Often we send out our notification process we broadcast it citywide to anyone, and we ask that we're willing to send it out to Building and Safety, Planning Department, whoever would take our notification list.
Okay. And to our city attorney here, I know we've been trying to put together an ordinance that would give the Board of Public Works the authority to grant waivers to the moratorium. Where are we at on this? I know we've been waiting for it for a few months now.
Yes. We're in the process of putting that together and developing guidelines that would give the Board of Public Works guidance as to how to exercise the authority that ordinance would confer to them.
Would you give us a timeline, Ted, or 30, 60 days?
30 is probably overly optimistic, so I think 60 is probably realistic. We have a number of different...
All right, so maybe upon return from summer recess?
Yeah, we have a number of different ordinances in the street and sidewalk arena that we're putting together.
Okay, understood. Thank you so much. Do we have the applicant here as well? Thank you for your report. You may be seated. Your name, please?
Richard Spunt with American Communities.
Yes, Richard, you filled out a card here. So apparently you claim that you haven't received notice. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, we don't show any record of receiving notice. We had started construction.
The county assessor has your information on file?
They
Your
should.
address, they should, right? And the Bureau of Street Services, they physically put out notices on the street the week before. Why didn't you contact the Bureau when the notices were posted on the street or when the parking signs went up?
That I'm not sure.
Okay, we're trying to avoid this as much as possible in the city. It's like, why have a moratorium when we've done a lot better job for the record. I know we've when I first got here in 2012, we saw a number of these come through 2012, 2013. So no, we're now experiencing a handful of them throughout the year. Did you want to speak on the item, Mr. Spunt?
Well, what I would say
Just
is
had a couple questions.
we had
If you can start his time, John? Go ahead, sir.
We had started construction back in January of 2015. It's an affordable housing project. Had we had known or received the notice, we could have gotten the sewer and the water connected a lot earlier because they're just stubbed to the property line. This is an affordable housing project. It's a tax credit deal that has already been pre-leased and is scheduled to be turned over at the end of June. We're now 8 months into the moratorium, so we're just asking for a waiver a little earlier so we can still meet our tax credit and our deadlines.
In a time where we're thirsting for more housing, I appreciate the support of more affordable housing in the city. But some frustrations that we have here as well, that when we have moratoriums in place, we need to abide by them. Just like ordinances that we approve without having an enforcement arm makes no sense. So we do know the importance of this project. So we will grant that moratorium, to lift the moratorium on this item. Appreciate your testimony. If I can bring up Sergio Infante. Sergio, it looks like we're going to move on this. You still want to speak to represent Mr. Cedillo? You're good? I'm good if you're good. I think, any questions on this, Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, if I could have Keith from BSS come up, anybody else who might want to join. Recently I learned that the city of Chicago established, not too long ago, established the Office of Construction Coordination, which allows various public works departments and agencies to collaborate on projects. And this is one of the first questions I asked when I got here about making sure where all the different departments work with each other. And I know BSS, DOT, Street Services, they do have connections where that when they do repaving, they come right out and try to make sure they coordinate for restriping and all the other different things. Right. But recently I learned about the Office of Construction Coordination, which was developed here by our own city way before the Chicago, but it was never implemented, which I am going to be asking colleagues to, and I believe we spoke with your office for the budget cycle to be heard, where the Office of Construction Coordination would work with planning, work with all the different departments to make sure that something like this doesn't happen. So in a case like this, would Office of Construction Coordination have helped and saved money? And can you kind of talk a little bit more about the Office of Construction Coordination?
I'll just say amen to what you just said. The reason why I say that, we want to basically project and be transparent with our resurfacing program. Anybody that's willing to basically take our information, we want that feedback, a planned construction project. Our goal is to project a 3-year resurfacing program for everybody to see, not just the city family, but utility companies, homeowners, whomever wants to take a look at it. And our goal is to, once we project this, is that all construction work underground is done prior to resurfacing coming and paving the street to avoid these street cuts afterwards. And so we'd be highly interested in, being on this type of committee or anything like that at any given time, because we don't want to be, say, project driven. We want to be micro-paver driven, and we want to, the planning department, building and safety. We have quarterly meetings, just to let you know, with the Department of Water and Power to eliminate these type of conflicts. And like I mentioned, we just met with the Bureau of Engineering to talk about the public works reservation system, things of that nature. So we would be glad to sit on any type of committee like this, and I would like to say with our resurfacing program, be completely transparent. This is where we plan to be, so we can advertise this and let people know that your street resurfacing is coming to your neighborhood at some point in time, and that we want to bring a holistic approach to the resurfacing program, not only just for underground utilities, but access ramps, trees, sidewalks, whatever we can do prior to the street being resurfaced, and that way improve the community once the street is paved and have a nice, aesthetic, good-looking product.
I just want to kind of second Keith's discussion here. We've been working very closely with Bureau of Street Services, trying to coordinate on this street resurfacing issues. The other thing is we're working with Building Industry Association, both power and water system, trying to reach out to the development community, work a little closer with them. And I also want to give a quick shout out to the Deputy City Engineer Ted Allen in BOE. Ted's been doing a great job. We had some permitting issues that impacted DWP providing water service to developers and to homeowners. And our permitting times have gone down in Central from 117 days down to 30 days, thanks to Ted Allen making a really strong effort to track things and follow up on his process and get some additional staffing. So really appreciate, we've seen greater coordination between the different agencies.
And Mr. Chair, I mean, to increase that coordination, I mean, the Office of Construction Coordination as well as some updated software so they could coordinate between all these different departments. I think it's a little investment that'll go a long way where we could, because, you know, I know we all get it where constituents call and say, hey, they just repaved and why they just tear this up again? And, you know, it's just, and this new coordination division will have, from what I'm understanding, they have the right to tell folks, hold off on your construction, hold off on this, so they could coordinate all these things. The utilities, development. So right now, I think within our city departments talk well each other, but that doesn't include development. So it's about getting, whenever the planning department has a new project that's going to gets applied for, then that gets all incorporated into the system, so they would all know. So,
no, good points, Mr.
Just wanted to put that plug in.
Let's do that. If we can, without objection, approve this motion, but add to get a report back in 90 days and to instruct the CLA to work with the assistance of the BOE, Bureau of Street Services, Bureau of Sanitation Planning Department, Department of Building Safety, DWP, come back to us in 90 days with recommendations for improving the coordination, including adding software, street resurfacing work with the installation of utility connections required by new construction. We will know by then, to Mr. Rue's point, if the budget will include an added division, a construction coordination division within the Bureau. Okay?
Thank you.
Anything else, colleagues? Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, efficiencies, Mr. Roos, good point. Appreciate that, David. Our final item, item number 13.
Item 13, Board of Public Works report relative to the financial status of the Public Works Trust Fund number 834 for fiscal years 2009, 2010 through 2014, 2015.
If I can bring back Fernando Campos, Board of Public Works, setting up his presentation. It's our last item, colleagues. Thanks for your patience here. Public Works Trust Fund. Please give us an overview of this fund, including who pays into it and how departments can take money from it.
Again, Fernando Campos, Executive Officer with the Board of Public Works. Today is definitely a great day. I'm pleased to be in front of your committee again this morning presenting on a second item. The item before you is the reconciliation of our Public Works Trust Fund that the Board of Public Works currently oversees. This has not been done in almost 6 years due to the Great Recession and also cutbacks in our services over the last almost a decade. We were unable to reconcile and report back to City Council as required since 2007 to report back on our financial status with our Public Works Trust Fund. The Public Works Trust Fund, it really serves the purpose of a bank account. It's almost like an escrow account. Who are the folks that can actually deposit into the trust fund? Currently, we call those depositors or permittees. These are folks that are pulling A permits, U permits, also any special projects and guarantee improvement types of projects. So those are typically what the depositors look like in terms of composition. The Public Works Trust Fund objective is really to hold deposits made by permittees, including receipts from violations, fees, settlements, surcharges, and donations into the Public Works Trust Fund. It operates as a bank and escrow account, and it also is used for a specific purpose. So the receipts can't be just distributed just because we want to distribute them. The receipts that we obtain and we hold in the Public Works Trust Fund are for a specific purpose. I will indicate a couple of areas that we may have some flexibility in terms of what we can do with some distributions. In fact, currently with the Budget and Finance Committee, this is something that we're also discussing in terms of deliberations for next steps and the ability to possibly use some of these funds to fund future Public Works Trust Fund projects. The Public Works Trust Fund oversight, Vicki, if you can go to the next slide. One more. One more. The Public Works Trust Fund oversight is really about governance, making sure that we're reporting on a monthly basis, having internal controls, and also management, making sure that we have the right accountants in place, making sure that we're collecting the right monies and that we have the right administrator for the funds. The main thing is really making sure that our accounting procedures and financial reporting is done in accordance to accounting standards, and also they're part of the city's liability under the CAFR, which is the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Public Works Trust Fund, the balance, as you will see in the next slide, has increased dramatically from about $68 million to $101 million as of June 30, 2015. Again, this is a great opportunity not only for the city, but it's also, I'm very pleased to be in front of your committee to report that we actually finally reconciled these 6 years. I don't think that would have been possible without the consistent assistance with our Office of Accounting. Our Director of Accounting, Victoria Santiago, is in the room. Also, thank you, Vicki, for your help and your team to get us to this point. But also, I have to say thank you to the City Council, because during this year's budget, your City Council authorized one position to be dedicated as a senior accountant to help us with the Public Works Trust Fund. Because of this additional position, we were able to dedicate one person to help us with the reconciliation of 6 years of escrow of deposits. So without that approval and without your support, we would have not been able to get to this point. Again, 6 years of backlog, we're finally caught up, and I think as the executive officer for the Board of Public Works, it's a really great day for me because we can actually start moving forward from this point on, having discussions such as our Public Works Trust Fund Nexus Study, having discussions in terms of what can we do with some of these monies and where can we tap into these resources. So getting to Councilman Buscaino's question in terms of how much money is there and how much money can we possibly use for future distributions, the financial components is really made up of 5 different areas. Currently, we have $101 million in our total deposits. About $30 million has been lent out over the last 10 years or so to various city departments. I am pleased to indicate that of the $30 million, about $5 million has actually been paid back over the last several months. So that loan balance right now is approximately $26 million. Of that, that leaves us with a cash balance of about $70 million. Now, that's not to say that we can start tapping into this money and we can start spending. Again, these funds are for restricted purposes. They were collected for a B permit. It was collected for an A permit. And in some cases, it was even collected for our street tree planting components. However, we do have about $2.7 million in appropriations that would be reduced from that $70 million cash balance. And then we have about $25 million in working capital that we have as what we call reserves. The area, to go to your question, Councilman Buscaino, the $10.4 million is what we know as the pre-post 1989 restricted balances. This is where that Nexus study comes into play. This is the amount that we believe that we can distribute that money out to the council offices to fund projects for public works. The goal behind the Nexus, $10.4 million is the amount that we believe that could be distributed. However, that is caveated with the that's caveated with the Nexus study findings. So the consultant that we plan to hire, or we're proposing to hire, may come back with some recommendations in terms of reasonable relationship. This is what we call the Nexus study. They could come back with some other restrictions. So what we don't know right now is that we have over 12,000 deposits, but what we don't know is of those deposits, where do those deposits belong to in terms of council districts? So the idea with the Nexus study is not only to develop a reasonable relationship and adopt a policy, but also to geoplot where these deposits are being located by council district and by location, so that we can do a GIS layering system where we can take the existing deposits, layer it against our current projects that we're funding through capital improvement or also other public works project, and be able to layer those 2 GIS layers and find out exactly where those deposits are currently being held and where our future projects that we can fund with this $10.4 million. Before we do that, we need someone to scrub all these accounts. Again, we have about 12,000 deposits in our Public Works Trust Fund that we need a consultant to come in. The vision is to have someone, a team of folks come in, about 4 to 6 individuals to come in over a 3 to 4 month period to look at all these deposits and geocode them and also indicate which council district these deposits belong to. So once we
pretty much you're going to put together a forensic study on these
pretty
deposits.
much a forensic auditing proposal.
And where they initiated from and where they plan on going to.
Correct. So when you look at the total cash balance, you minus out the pre-post 1989 restricted balances. That's the Nexus Study portion that we're trying to look at. And we reserve about $25 million in working capital. That leaves us a net cash available balance of about $31.9 million that's available for potentially even borrowing if the council wanted to, or even the Board of Public Works wanted to do that. So that is actually an additional account that we can tap into in the future. One thing that I do want to say is that this is as of June 30th, 2015. Now that we've moved forward, we have actually collected some monies for loans. For example, our loan balance has gone down from $30 million down to $26 million. We've also transferred about $10.9 million in B permit revenue. Again, that's because of the position that your council approved this year. We are anticipating doing another $1.5 million transfer this month. Next year, we're going to be right on schedule of about $12 million. I believe that's the proposal for B permits. So again, now that we are done with the reconciliation, this is what is allowing us to move forward with the transferring of those revenues that the city has not been receiving in the last couple of years. So in terms of next steps and some opportunities for us at the Board of Public Works, what we noticed is that we had 3 accounts that really comprise almost 3/4 or 3/4 of all the balances, and those were special projects, general improvement guarantees, and B permits. These are the 3 areas that I am working as the executive officer along with my director of Office of Accounting to look at opportunities that we can debottleneck these funds and also put them into good use. So we are working now with our Bureau of Engineering. We're also working with the CAO's office in terms of transferring those B permit revenues and getting them to the general fund as quickly as possible, but most importantly, making sure that we are providing the services that these deposits were collected for. Another opportunity for the Board of Public Works is to look at the top 5 accounts that comprise the highest percentage of growth in terms of dollar amount. And those are the B permits, general improvement guarantees, vacation accounts, excavation accounts, and the Million Tree Initiative. So these are, again, opportunities administratively that we will start tapping into so that we can move these accounts as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. I won't go over the interest earnings and loan outstanding since I've already mentioned it. In terms of next steps, we are going to continue our reconciliation reporting back to the City Council. We are required to do so on an annual basis. I'm pleased to say that we are back on schedule. We are back on reporting. This is 6 years worth of reconciliation. It took us almost 9 months to get to this point. However, once we're here, now we can start having the dialogue in terms of how do we utilize this money? How can we move this money out of the Public Works Trust Fund and get it into public projects and fund those projects. We will continue to do more fund transfers. We will continue to go through some of our oversight restrictions, which is our resources, human resources, information technology. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we complete that Nexus study. So the recommendation before you is just to receive and file this report. There's no action other than receive and file, but we are pleased to take any questions that you may have.
Questions, colleagues? Thank you for that report. Some opportunities there, and 6 years long and waning, but I'm glad, again, trying to find ways to get that study done, and so we can put those dollars to good use. Okay, so no action, just to receive and file this financial status update. Appreciate your report and your work today. Thank you so much. That was our final item, colleagues. With that, we already took up general public comment. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.